Let's talk about Gojo's domain clash with Ryoma and Sukuna. I have seen a lot of people confused about this domain clash and how it occurred and how Gojo's domain collapsed in general. Jujutsu Kaisen has a lot of new readers after Gojo came back and Megami getting taken over. So in this video, I want to go over some of the questions I have seen and some of the things I have to say about domains in general. And the biggest thing that I want to bring up here is that a lot of people seem to think this is one slash going across Gojo, which it is currently. But that is not how Malevolent Shrine operates, and Malevolent Shrine is not just dismantle. It also incorporates cleave, which adjusts itself to your cursed energy and reinforcement to one-shot you. And Malevolent Shrine itself does not stop attacking until it is gone. So that's how Malevolent Shrine works, but I've also seen some people ask, how on earth did Sukuna manage to kill Gojo's domain? So Jujutsu Jesus here, he is having a bit of trouble in the fact that he is currently being bombarded by cleave and dismantle, unless he decides to put Malevolent Shrine away for some reason. And on the note of the Mahoraga picture you are currently seeing floating across your screen, Mahoraga survived, yes, but Mahoraga was also already adapting to dismantle previously, and was theorized by Sukuna to be adapting to slashing attacks in general. And on top of that, this is a 15-finger Sukuna, this one is 20 fingers. And on the note of 20 fingers Sukuna, before somebody talks about it in the comments section, yes, he has not eaten his last finger yet, but he is at effectively 20 fingers. He directly states that the power of his own corpse could make up for a finger's worth. So how did Sukuna win the domain clash with Gojo Satoru? And I have seen a lot of people say that Gojo did not lose to Sukuna in the actual clash, which is true in the sense that their territories were equal. But the reality is, if Gojo had an open barrier, he would not have been sure hit. And due to skill issue, he lost to Malevolent Shrine in their clash. So let's talk about the actual open barrier and why open barriers are so strong to begin with. An open barrier domain still has a barrier, it just has no outer shell to remove. And we see when sorcerers perform domain expansions using a full barrier with an outer shell, the actual volume of the area is bigger than what you would expect from the outside. And curse techniques are imbued into the barrier itself, not the outer shell. And this is what allows for a sure hit or other technique effects depending on what the user wants, as seen with Juzo during the exchange event. So to close your barrier to trap someone inside, you have to create an outer shell. But by being a talented barrier user and completely foregoing the shell, you get the divine technique of expanding your territory into real space. And doing so, you lose out on the crazy volume of having a closed space that is bigger on the inside. But because of this, you basically copy-paste the actual volume of your territory within a closed shell into real space, increasing the sure hit effect radius of your entire domain to upwards of 200 meters in Sukuna's case. And it seems that a binding vow is inherently formed due to an escape route being a part of an open barrier in general. And this isn't 100% confirmed, but I'm guessing the binding vow around an open barrier is formed upon casting the barrier as an individual moment. You expand your domain, you decide to use an open barrier, an escape route is allowed, and a binding vow is formed as a result of this expansion. I could be wrong, but that's how I see it, because them going around and reforming a binding vow or destroying a binding vow, depending on how they want to cast their domain, is a little strange to me, because Tengen has known Kenjaku for probably over 1,000 years, and they expected him to use an outer shell, but he didn't. He used an open barrier instead, so he should be capable of both. And you effectively locking yourself out of using a shell ever again doesn't make a lot of sense to me, if you're going around breaking your own binding vow. And that is my long-winded explanation on open barriers and some of the things I believe about open barriers. But let's get back to the actual domain clash, because how did Gojo manage to get his domain smushed? So they both expand their domains. Gojo puts out the Unlimited Void and Sukuna uses the Malevolent Shrine. Malevolent Shrine gets pasted into real space. At the same time, Gojo creates his barrier and has his territory inside. So inside, territories, neck and neck, sure hit effects cancelled out. Unfortunately for Gojo, Sukuna's open barrier domain exists in the same place his barrier was formed, and more importantly, the outer shell that is holding his barrier together. And since Sukuna's sure hit effect exists in real space, he is able to attack the cursed energy target that is Gojo's barrier, ripping apart the outer shell and Gojo's barrier, collapsing his territory and domain. And once his territory collapses completely, he is now caught in the sure hit effect. So where did Gojo fuck up? Well, his first mistake was thinking he's the protagonist, just kidding. In actuality, the smart decision would have been to teleport the moment he saw a domain from Sukuna start to open. I know Gojo's arrogant, but this is like some brain baloney levels of stupid. And let's talk about the max elephant in the room, which is that Gojo didn't know about the open barrier domain. Gege Akatame, are we fucking serious right now? I have seen cope around this. I have seen people say that, oh, Gojo did know, he was just too arrogant, which might be the case, but that is not the point. The point is that Yuta, Hikari, and Maki, they didn't know about the open barrier, and they have to fight Sukuna next if Gojo dies. These galaxy brains are sitting here doughy-eyed saying, that's impossible. And I don't really know what their plan is here if Gojo dies. I guess they're going to call up Fred, everybody jumps into the mystery van, and they drive on over to go jump Sukuna. And on the way there, he just 200-meter Malevolent shrines and cuts the brake line. But this travesty of writing aside, let's talk about curse technique burnouts and what this means for Gojo and Sukuna going forward. So does Gojo have a curse technique burnout? It is heavily implied he does. Before fighting Kenjaku, Yuki, Tsukumo, Choso, and Tengen had a conversation about curse technique burnouts. And during this, we see a picture of Gojo brought up as an example of curse techniques burning out. And this also lines up with Gojo being affected by Hanami's flowers after his fight with Jogo. If Gojo's infinity was up during this moment, these flowers shouldn't have done anything because Gojo's infinity sorts objects by cursed energy. But if Gojo's curse technique was burnt out because of his expansion against Jogo, it explains how Hanami was able to affect him and get away from him. So while it's not directly stated in relation to Gojo, the implication is pretty clear. Now, as for Ryomen Sukuna, does he have a curse technique burnout from Malevolent Shrine? This one is a little more questionable because we have a very strange feat surrounding this in Shibuya, where after using Malevolent Shrine against Mahoraga, he immediately pulls out the fire arrow and nukes him on the spot. So there are a few options with this one. Number one would be he has no curse technique burnout. And this one doesn't really make sense. We see other super proficient barrier users like Kenjaku still get burnout from their domain. And even though Sukuna is almost guaranteed to be better than Kenjaku with curse energy efficiency and technique, he's already been shown to not just outright ignore domain rules like domain amplification. So how did Sukuna manage this? Well, the other option is that this is his fire arrow burnt out, and if that's true, well, fuck. But option number 3, which is the one I believe, is that because his fire arrow seems to be stored externally, it does not suffer from curse technique burnout. But things like Dismantle and Cleave, which are not stored separately, are in fact burnt out after using Malevolent Shrine. But we'll likely find out which one of these is correct very soon. And while we are on the topic of domains, I want to talk about Kenjaku's domain. Kenjaku's domain is considered an equivalent feat to Sukuna's. Now the flip side of this is that just because Kenjaku has an open barrier does not mean his actual territory is refined enough to compete with Gojo or Sukuna. Because in the Gojo versus Sukuna domain clash, we see that just because you have an open barrier does not mean you always overwhelm your opponent's territory. So for all we know, Kenjaku's territory is worse than theirs, and that actually makes a lot more sense when we look at the data books saying that Kenjaku would have guaranteed loss in Shibuya with all the disaster curses, and he was willing to clash against Yuki Tsukumo, directly stating that Yuki's domain would have made things more interesting. I don't see how it would have made it more interesting if her domain was not strong enough to at least clash with his. And hot take here, I don't think there's any chance that Yuki Tsukumo was able to clash with Gojo or Sukuna. I'm sorry, Yuki fans, she is really strong and she does have that black hole, but she is just not a Sukuna or a Gojo. And yes, again, the black hole is OP. The black hole is probably the strongest ability we will ever see in this series, but it looks like Yuki has to die to perform this feat, which is not practical, and she also sucks in her home planet. But back to Kenjaku's domain, yes, it's very strong. It's probably the 3rd strongest domain in the entire series in the sense of the territory. The truth is, we just don't know for sure, but I don't believe it is strong enough to clash with the actual domain territory of Gojo and Sukuna. But that's just my opinion, and I want to hear yours. Let me know what you think about open barriers and Sukuna's Malevolent Shrine. But if you want to see a full rundown of domain expansions in Jujutsu Kaisen, check out EnemyStandUser's domain expansions explained video. It is probably the best domain video on YouTube. And if you like content like this, subscribe for more. And as always, thanks for watching. And also, as of the making of this video, Gojo is currently getting hit by the Malevolent Shrine, but he will live. There is no way Gojo dies to this. I am here to preach the word the Gojo fans need to hear. Your king is safe. He will live for now.